Welcome back to Capital Conversations. Andy and I are here tonight with Dan Feidt from the Occupy Minnesota group and organization. And thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I just want to give a quick shout out to my friends at the Industrial Workers of the World that won a huge labor fight yesterday at the National Labor Relations Board. They fought their bosses at Jimmy John's to basically make sure that the customers would be safe because people were being forced to work when they were sick. And they were fired for organizing around that issue, and they got reinstated by a federal administrative judge yesterday. And so they had a good showing in a protest, which actually a bunch of Occupy Minnesota type people did participate in. And I think that maybe that's a good example of sort of to get a sense of how the movement works. People work back and forth across different groups and sort of especially act in solidarity with things like labor causes, environmental causes, that kind of thing. And so Occupy people had a good presence today with the IWW protesting at the Jimmy John's to say, hey, we won this labor fight, we have real rights as workers and so forth. And so I think it's a good example of how Occupy is a pretty kind of fluid and amorphous movement, and you'll find people jumping in with issues and sort of building solidarity and a kind of exchange of support, essentially.
Now, but it does sound like the owners are going to appeal, the Jimmy John's owners are going to appeal, so they may not get their jobs back.
I mean, I would presume that those owners will keep fighting on that, but really the workers who got fired did a really, really solid job organizing. I think with the economic disruption, which has really happened because, essentially the United States economy became extremely financialized. The financial services industry got way too big, and then that led to a number of bubbles developing, and now we're sort of in this rocky quasi-recession depression period. And so many people are working in the service industry because other jobs are not available if they can even get a job in the service industry. And so that was a logical place for people to start organizing on the labor basis in that service industry. And I think it's going to keep on working. I think people see a real need to push back and not just simply get pushed around. And instead they need to work in groups, not just simply as individuals. And so that type of philosophy, I think, when the Occupy movement really got started, I think that, that's sort of one of the sort of basis ideas for it. The idea that you need to start linking together in informal kind of bottom-up sort of ways to push back directly against issues, whether it's in the workplace or the government or other corporate policies. And so I think we've seen a lot of momentum in that in a lot of different levels, both locally and nationally.
Well, there's been a lot of talk about the demise of the Occupy movement, especially by the right. And how it doesn't have the momentum it had, and where is this big movement, and the summer's coming and it's nice out, so are you going to set up the tent cities? Let's talk about it. Has it gone? Where's the Occupy movement?
I would say in terms of Minneapolis specifically, the movement sort of bottomed out right in the dead middle of the winter around December and January. And then
shocking.
Yeah, right, Yeah, and so but then at that point people kind of recalibrated and said, okay, if we can't gather in a physical space down at the Hennepin County Government Center, we can still meet on a regular basis. They meet Wednesday night, open meetings at Walker Church. Other groups come through and build connections. Since then, a number of different campaigns of sort of groups, some of them more tightly tied into the core than others, have worked to do a number of different things. And so what we saw on April 7th was people tried to reoccupy PV Plaza. The police tried to throw some sort of dubious ordinances at them to sort of say you can't do this. People pushed back. There was a mass arrest. The police assaulted a KSTP videographer, and I and some other people sort of helped document that and show that that was what had happened. And then people were able to demand a meeting with the mayor and the police chief to hold them accountable, not just for what happened that weekend, but for broader patterns of state violence and police brutality and abuse. But then also a different group of people was able, with the Occupy Homes movement, to shut down a sheriff's sale that was going on. And I think that was another case of this sort of epidemic of mortgage fraud and financial crime. And
right, so, people are losing their houses.
Yeah, people are losing their homes. And so what the general idea across the movement is that people need to take what's called direct action and not just count on the mechanisms of representative democracy to try to achieve real change, to try to force the banks to have to renegotiate because they, control everybody through debt in our society, essentially. And so by using direct action, by using different groups of people sort of working together, you can kind of like sort of keep fighting the powers that be and really start getting some traction. And so I think what we'll see is a really strong labor presence for May Day, May 1st. There's a general strike that's been called, so everybody should, step out of work and start questioning all of these underlying relationships that keep us running around like little hamsters in a wheel, essentially. And so I think that when you kind of can help spark people's imaginations to that type of thing, you can really make a major difference.
What
Go
was
ahead.
the outcome of the police meeting?
Well, I mean,
Or with Ryback too?
sure. I mean, the Ryback meeting, essentially, Ryback wouldn't even really commit to having another meeting. The mayor's pretty good at sort of being fairly flighty and not committing to situations where he would have to make any further commitments. And so, but I mean, that's how he likes to kind of play his political game. But what did happen later in the week on Friday was a great example of the development of closed government and the way that they try to kind of run the city of Minneapolis like their little black box. Barb Johnson, the city council president, and the mayor tried to rail through a resolution that would have totally removed the First Amendment rights of anybody on Nicollet Mall, PV Plaza, Riverside Plaza, and the Loring Greenway between midnight and 6 a.m. And they basically they wanted to rail it through so that I couldn't interview someone in Nicollet Mall at night, proselytizer couldn't put out their religion at night, and protesters certainly wouldn't be able to be in front of U.S. Bank at night. And I think that really shows that the DFL establishment, the mayor, the city council, they're not really that dedicated to executing their oath of office to defend our inalienable rights that are recognized in the Constitution.
It was not passed.
No, the resolution got sort of kicked to committee, and then a further discussion sort of ensued, and I think there's a public hearing on May 2nd or 3rd. But it's frustrating because that was clearly an ordinance, not a resolution. They were putting it through secretly, and only because Cam Gordon blew the whistle did anybody know about this. And that's also an example of essentially structural racism, because that policy would have had a much worse effect on minorities than white people, but they had no opportunity to find out that this policy was trying to be railed through. And so it's pretty frustrating to find out that really both parties are, dedicated to kind of keeping things as tight as possible to make it as difficult as possible for people to express opposition, to try to get traction against these corporations that have been routinely abusing everybody.
Well, Dan, you said dubious ordinances. I mean, you're required to draw a permit if you're going to protest in a public space. I mean, that tends to be the process you have to go through. Like, you have to
That's not
request
entirely true.
if you're going to gather a large crowd. I mean,
the Constitution pretty clearly says that Congress shall make no law regarding freedom of assembly. If I want to gather together some of my friends and stay out in front of U.S. Bank or, say, Wells Fargo, which, for example,
I'm not going to argue
right,
that. I agree
right.
with you on that point. But I mean, there are ordinances in place in the city of Minneapolis, just like St. Paul. We saw it during the RNC when they ran us all off the law, and I was covering that, and it was like, I had the cop show me the ordinance, and only because I was a reporter did he bother to open the book and show me. But yeah, you're required to apply, and they have to issue a permit, et cetera, et cetera.
What really that usually tends to more
right
apply
or wrong?
To,
can
yeah.
we challenge that? I mean,
I think we do need to challenge that. I really strongly believe that these are inalienable rights which are recognized by the Constitution. They are not created by the government, and the local and state governments do not have the right to take away our freedom of assembly or expression. And I think people need to keep pushing back on that. Now, whether or not people are in, say, for example, a privately owned space, or they have electronic amplification, those are different types of things. But generally speaking, just the basic right of people to assemble is incredibly essential, because for a number of different reasons.
Oh, sure.
Partly so that, the people that are perpetrating injustices know that people are doing these things, but also so people that are resisting these injustices have the ability to connect with each other and see that they're not alone. And I think that's incredibly important, and that's been really jeopardized by what's been going on.
Well, you won't get any
so,
argument there.
Yeah, and so what, in my role in this was the day before Occupy Wall Street started in New York, my friends there said, hey Dan, we're about to go down to this Wall Street protest, we need help producing live video, using the live stream technology, same one you guys have right here.
Yep.
And so from the very first day, I've been engaged in that process in New York, and then I spent a month in New York a few weeks after it started. Basically awakening people's imaginations to the idea that they could actually change what they thought was just the default historical process that was going to happen, that people can actually have agency in their own lives, especially people like homeless people, people that have fallen off the economic ladder in the last few years because the financial system is, run in such an illegal way and it extracts so much wealth from everybody. And so we really were able to, using things like video, awaken really millions of people to the idea that they could do something different. And so the Occupy thing is really, it's a pretty loose motif for the idea that if you jump into a space and you make a little ruckus, you can actually really affect how those things go down.
Well, you mentioned it. So what's the end goal of the Occupy movement?
It's pretty loose. I think
It's amorphous, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
Depends
exactly.
on who you talk to.
Exactly. And so it might be one day it's acting in solidarity with the IWW. Another day it might be saying, okay, we are going to resist foreclosures and the fraudulent conveyances, the many issues which city government officials don't want to face.
Isn't that the problem, though, with the Occupy movement in itself? I mean, you've seen this coalescing in the Tea Party. They've actually got some political gravitas now, as you can see in Washington. But when you talk about the Occupy movement, it seems like a conflagration of people, and also that there's some people that may not be helping your cause. Well, for instance, anarchists who want to perpetrate just anarchy. I mean, and nobody's saying you're not welcome in the Occupy movement, but
right. Well,
they may do a disservice to your ultimate political goals if you're not.
Yeah, that's a good question. What I would say is that the anarchist philosophy that the state shouldn't be this huge looming thing over everybody's life, but also the idea that you shouldn't have formal leadership structures has actually been really embedded in the whole kernel of the process. I mean, I learned essentially mainly from anarchists before the Republican National Convention the same kind of procedures for having unstructured kind of group meetings, which is a series of hand signals such as I block this, I support this, I don't support this. Those are essentially anarchist type meeting techniques, which then emerged immediately at the core of this whole thing. So this whole thing has actually had not just a kernel of a presence of homeless people, but also a presence of anarchist organizational theory. And I think that that's really introduced a large number of people to it. So I think whether or not people do take actions autonomously that other people may or may not agree with, I think that that's just sort of one of the risks that kind of comes with the scene.
Let's just stipulate that property destruction, I mean, is not exactly I mean, when they were throwing cans through the window down at Macy's, I was pissed off about that. I mean, this is my town.
Sure,
there were some people out there, Dan.
I hear what you mean, but the thing is that, think of the amount of property destruction that's been created by the financial services industry, which doesn't happen in a spectacular way, like a window cracking.
And you're not going to get an argument from me on that.
Sure.
But violence that begets violence, or vandalism that begets vandalism, to me, that's not a real solution to the problem. At some point, don't we have to sit down and talk about, if we're going to fundamentally change the system, we can't participate or lower yourselves to the same sort of crap that goes on the other way.
Yeah, well, I think...
where's your moral high ground in that, then?
Well, I think that there's...
Or do you need it?
Well, right. I mean, I think that there's more of a sense that, simply put, people can't handle the kind of fake veneer that's put over everything. Like, the downtown improvement district follows people around and erases their chalk from the sidewalk. And that's, their activity. Like, the power structure tries to kind of erase everything, and so I think that when people put forward resistance into that to push their messages out, I think that really carries the day, and I think that a lot of people have been able to relate to that, because what the big corporations do is so destructive, and the fact that public officials don't address those crimes is of a vastly wider magnitude than the last 15 or 20 years of any crazy protest that's gone on in the United States. The damage that comes from government officials looking the other way from corporate crime vastly outweighs that by many orders of magnitude. So we need to keep that in perspective, and if we can do that, I think we can move forward effectively.
Are you a revolutionary?
I think that that's a big word. Personally, I like to see spaces be opened up where many different perspectives can be had. That's why I've tried to do things like build out websites, build out media systems, where those discussions can be had between the radical ones.
I don't want to hear the political talking points from your side. Are you a revolutionary?
I would like to see very dramatic changes. The two-party system, my grandfather was here at the state capitol for 20 years or more as a senator, and he knew that the two-party system made it easier for the financial industry to exploit Minnesotans. And that the reason we had a mortgage moratorium in the Depression was because we didn't have a two-party system in Minnesota.
Sure.
And so I think that looking at those core changes, if you say a revolutionary is simply somebody who wants to readdress categories, to readdress the fractional reserve banking in the
Dan,
Fed.
you don't get to
that's-
redefine
I don't know
what a
what counts as a revolution, you know?
Well,
I have
I'm
no
just
idea.
I'm saying you seem to be on the front of the issues, and you're trying to extrapolate change from obviously a system that
Yeah.
it's set up not to allow that right now, or
Yeah.
to make it very, very difficult.
Yeah, and I always believe that you can use the techniques of media, the techniques of reaching out to people to really reach into the core of that and achieve really different historical outcomes than you would have thought otherwise possible.
You don't know unless you try. And if you
Exactly.
see an injustice and you try to address it, it's better than sitting at home in your suburban house and guessing somebody else will take care of it.
Yeah, it's about spreading agency into individual people's lives, regardless of which political philosophies are in play.
We're almost out of time. But Andy, any questions for Dan?
I'm good. That was
All
that
right.
was very good debate, you guys. had.
Dan, it's good to have you
Yeah.
on, and I know that we're frequently talking to each other through
Right.
other means, and it's good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
And I'm glad you're doing well.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thanks for joining us tonight. I would be remiss if I didn't thank Representative Deborah Hillstrom and Senator John Carlson, as well as Representative
Jim
Jim
Abler.
Abler from Anoka. And also we had production assistance from Susan Miracle and Connor Malloy. Our producers were Catherine Laudenslager and Matt Ealing, Laudenslager and Matt Ealing. And Capital Conversations is produced in association with KFAI Radio News and Public Record Media. You can learn more about them at publicrecordmedia.com or kfai.org. You can view all of our episodes anytime online at mncapitalnews.com. For Andy Friedel, I'm Marty Owings. We'll see you at the Capitol.
Good night.